All right, welcome back to the Relationship Comeback Podcast. This is your host, Carter Anderson. And today, again, last episode we had a celebrity. I would say today we have a celebrity too. It's a man of many titles. We have Chad Olson with us today. Chad, do you want to kind of give us a little bit of a background into the many hats that you wear and maybe why some of those might be important to our listeners in the sense of the unique perspective that you bring to maybe dating and young single adults and all that good stuff.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Carter, thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm super happy to be here. Yeah, I love working with young adults. I've had lots of experiences working with young adults. I'm currently the Institute Director here at the St. George Institute. And so, I mean, my life every day is interacting with hundreds of young adults. So I love that world that I swim in. But also maybe just to back up a little bit, if that's okay, with some history. I remember being in my adolescence and having a bit of a, I don't know, there's that pressure to say, like, what are you going to do when you grow up? And how are you going to provide for your family? And what do you want to do for your career? And I had a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty around that. And I remember earlier in that kind of childhood adolescent phase, I wanted to be an accountant. And the reason why I had
As
one
a
of my
kid,
great as a kid, yeah, like, and here's why. One of my childhood buddies at Vineyard Elementary School, his name is Devin Albrecht. We used to go to his house to play, and this was like the house in the neighborhood, right? I mean, big, beautiful red brick, had all the things. I was like, "Hey, Devin, what does your dad do for a living?" He's like, "He's an accountant." I'm like, "I want to be an accountant." So it was that was my motivation. And then I realized I do not like accounting at all. That would not be a good fit at all. And so I remember going off, getting home from my mission and just trying to do some career exploration, trying to find out what I wanted to do. And I have an older brother who is a marriage and family therapist. And I remember having a conversation with him, kind of exploring, like, hey, what's it like, Mike? And tell me a little bit about it. And then I got this point where I needed to declare a major. And I remember going through all of the different majors at BYU. And when I got to the major that said marriage, family, and human development, it just struck me. You know what I'm saying? You know, those moments of clarity. And I was like, that's it. Like that is what I need to do. There may be nothing more important that I can do in my life than to be able to help strengthen marriages and families. So from that point, I decided that I was going to go a route to be able to learn about marriages, about families, what makes them work, what are some of the dysfunctional practices that I could help to help families overcome. But I always, in the back of my mind, wanted to be a seminary teacher as well. And so I was trying to figure out how can I make both of these paths congruent. And so I decided to be able to pursue my bachelor's degree in marriage, family, human development while doing some student teaching for seminary. And then decided to just go straight into a master's degree at BYU in marriage and family therapy. So I have a master's degree from BYU. And also was hired as a full-time seminary teacher and right now I do both. So, like I said, I'm the institute director now, but also co-own a practice here in Southern Utah, Ascend Counseling and Wellness, and so do some therapy on the side, and love being able to utilize both of those skill sets in a professional way.
I would be curious how kind of being in both of those areas of your life, and I would imagine maybe your counseling isn't just centered with young adults, but you are in the marriage aspect of it. So you're seeing kind of maybe this dating world, and then maybe some of the outcomes of it and things like that. How does that kind of shift your perspective being with young adults, having that practice on the side, or not even on the side?
Huge.
It sounds like you're doing
Yeah.
both at the same.
Yeah, no, it's huge. I do work with some of my clients are young adults for sure, but a lot of them are later on in life who are married or who are single or who are divorced. And so the dating conversation is really relevant, of course, in young adulthood, and we're going to talk about that for sure, but also within my work with married couples. Oftentimes, part of our interventions is to go back to their dating years or their time in which they were dating, because a lot of strength actually can be derived from the beginning of someone's relationship. What I've often found is when couples start to struggle with the relationship, they forget why they fell in love with each other in the first place. So we have this little intervention called Back to the Beginning, and it's an opportunity for couples to recount some of those really good times that they had in their dating relationship. So I have an opportunity both professionally in the clinical setting, but also here at the Institute to be able to combine some of the lessons that I'm learning about marriage, about dating in both of those settings for sure.
Yeah. I mean, what a blessing for these institute students to have such a great resource. So thank you for dedicating your time to us and everybody like that, because it is just there's just so much nuance in the world of being a young adult. And so having somebody that has that type of expertise in the therapy world is just such a blessing. So thank you for doing that. And I'm sure you're
No, you're
super
welcome.
busy and not even saying on top of your church calling. And so like it's just you're an incredible man. So thank you for being on here today. Kind of our topic today is the genesis of it for me. I remember being a missionary sitting in one of my YSA bishop's office. Me and my companion were just sitting there talking to him, and he was just like, he's like, yeah, he was like, month 18 on my mission. He's like, I just felt like there was something missing in my heart and in my life. And he's just like, as he kind of chewed with that feeling, he's like, obviously he's like, it's a girl. He's like, I'm so excited to fill this gap or whatever. He goes home, gets married, whatever. And like in that moment, it like clicked for me. I'm like, yeah, like being a missionary is awesome. Like this is so cool. But like I'm stuck with this dude, 24 hours a day. Like that's great. But yeah, there is something missing. Like there is, you can just kind of feel that there is more to life than hanging out with the bros all the time. And I remember kind of having that same realization as him. Like I'm so excited for this. 6 years later, that same feeling is there. It doesn't necessarily just go away. And there are some pretty difficult feelings of loneliness that come with that, whether it's, you're hanging out with the big group of friends and you're like, man, I wish I had somebody here with me. Or it's at nighttime and you're going to bed. You're like, I'm so tired of going to bed by myself. Like, this is stupid. And so there's just
Mhm.
a lot of feelings of loneliness attached to being single, especially in Utah, where, your peers are getting married at 20, 21, 22. And you're like, man, I'm 26. I have my own insurance now. And I haven't been on a date in 6 months. You're like, this is crazy. And so I think this would be a really helpful conversation um, for a lot of people, because I don't know that there's a ton of conversation surrounding like just specifically loneliness and some tactics there to be able to hopefully make that healthier. Because for me, that's when my view of myself probably is the lowest, is when those feelings hit. And so I not only selfishly for myself, but I know a lot of friends struggling with the same thing. So I like to start kind of just with the overview, kind of get a wide picture of this. Why can prolonged isolation be damaging for mental and
Yeah,
emotional health when you're single? So that we
sure.
can kind of understand maybe why some of these things are so difficult, why it's hard. So what would be kind of your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I love that, Carter, and such a relevant and prevalent problem and challenge in a lot of ways. And I'm super excited to be able to dive into some of the intricacies of it, including our perceptions. In my therapy practice, I use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, which means we lean into our narratives, the story we tell ourselves, and our perceptions. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about that. But
So really what
maybe
he's saying,
just
he's about to do a therapy session to change some of my thoughts. No,
So
just
bu
kidding.
buckle up. Here we go. Good insight. That was very insightful, Carter. You got it exactly. But just maybe backing up a little bit on the nuances, as you mentioned, of the young adult years. So one of my professors that I did some research with up at BYU, we studied this developmental time frame, which is called emerging adulthood. I don't know if that's like a time period that you've heard of or that phrase used before. But it's basically this, right? For years and years and years, we'd have the research about infancy, childhood, adolescent, adulthood. But what we found is that there are these years between about the ages of 18 and 25 or 18 and 26 that these individuals will self-report that in some ways they feel like an adult and in some ways they do not feel like they're an adult. And so there's this level of ambiguity where they're saying, am I an adult? Kind of, and marriage is obviously part of that. Relationships is part of that. But I think what it does is it highlights the reality of the difficulty of this time of life for most people within
Mhm.
that emerging adulthood phase. And so we want to be able to have some clarity in terms of, okay, well, what marks adulthood? And sometimes marriage in the past has been an indicator that you are now an adult, right? Or graduating college or buying a house, whatever it is. There are these subjective criteria in terms of what it means to be an adult. But we want to be able to look at it through the lens of relationships. So I just wanted to be able to acknowledge that, especially within the phase of emerging adulthood, relationships can be complex and dynamic and nuanced, and it's not linear. Like, we can't just say, if you do this and this and this, and this is going to be the case. There are some principles, and I hope we're able to dive into some of those principles that will be helpful. But just to acknowledge, there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty in this phase of life, and I acknowledge and recognize the struggle for the young adults, especially as it relates to dating. So with that as sort of a backdrop, I would say it's important to be able to acknowledge that loneliness and being single are not synonymous. And I think that's important for a lot of different reasons, because while there might be a correlation there, we have to be careful not to buy into that false dichotomy that says, if I'm never married, then I'll always be lonely for the rest of my life. And to be able to say, well, we're going to talk about some things that even if you are single for the rest of your lives, then you can figure out how to be able to build a life that's very fulfilling and satisfying and connecting because of what you referenced, and that is the implications of loneliness. We know, and you probably have known this, but the U.S. Surgeon General 2 years ago talked about he uses the word as a health risk of loneliness. In fact, I love this. He says, widespread loneliness in the U.S. poses health risks as deadly as smoking up to 15 cigarettes daily. Right? So it's like,
Dang.
wow. Yeah, isn't that crazy? And so there are different reasons why and different contributing factors. But I think just to be able to put that at the outset to say, whoa, what is it about loneliness that would facilitate a finding that it's more harmful to our health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day? And I think at least part of that goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We have our pyramid. Some of you that have taken some introductory psychology classes might be familiar with this. And at the very base, you have like your physiological needs, right? Like food and water, air. Like, okay, yeah, for sure. That's got to be at the base. And then you have um, these levels as they go up. And the second one is safety, just to be able to feel like I live in a community where I don't have to worry about my actual safety. But the third one is love and belonging. And so, in these hierarchy of needs, basic needs that we have as human beings, love and belonging is right there in that pyramid. So then, if you take away that love and belonging and you're experiencing high levels of isolation and loneliness, then you are having one of your core needs as a human unfulfilled, which then, of course, is going to cause some negative effects with your emotional health, your mental health, and even physical health. So I think I probably couch it within a couple of those findings just at the outset.
Yeah, I mean, again, just as you're saying that, like, I see myself or my friends, really struggling with some of these feelings, and it literally takes a toll on them. Like, I would add an answer to this question, like, you can tell when somebody's kind of battling with it. And like that's hard because like the thing that you're struggling with is feelings of loneliness, and that kind of sometimes can cause even more loneliness because people can tell like, man, this person's carrying some heavy burdens. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the frustrating parts of this is it kind of is like a vicious cycle. Like if you can't pull yourself out of it, it just kind of perpetuates yourself. And that's kind of why I want to have this conversation because it is really hard to pull yourself out. It's not impossible. And so that's why I want to kind of dive into today some tactics we can use to kind of again, I don't want to say combat this, but I think when these feelings are really heavy, there's got to be a way to not just like let it take over. And I think
Sure.
that's where it becomes really dangerous. That's where it becomes really, like you're saying, it affects every aspect of your life, physical, mental, emotional. So maybe we just start there. What are some things that when those feelings are really lonely, whether it's late at night or whether, you just had another bad first date, and you're just like, man, I'm never getting out of this. I don't have kids. I don't have, like it's just I got this big house all to myself, or I'm living with roommates still at 28, like whatever it might be. Kind of what do we kind of do with some of those feelings too? Again, I don't think yeah, I would assume you would not promote suppressing emotion. And so not
Yeah.
suppressing that, but maybe processing it in a more healthy way that allows you to remain, in a good headspace. I would say mostly about yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you acknowledging the mental and emotional health component of this, because I think we do have to acknowledge the reality of depression, the reality of anxiety. And we know statistically we're about between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4, between 20 and 25% of individuals within this demographic, this young adult demographic, who are experiencing a mental health concern. So the reason that I mention that, Carter, is that sometimes we don't know which starts which. So an individual, for example, that's experiencing some level of depression may, as a symptom of the depression, experience loneliness and isolation. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like, and then this is the cycle you're talking about, right? And then as they experience the isolation and kind of withdrawal, then they feel more depressed. The reason I think that's important to mention is that if an individual is experiencing, lack of motivation, loss of interest, loss of pleasure, some of these key components, symptomology of depression, seek help for the depression first. Because on average, the treatment outcomes for depression are really high. They're really good. And that may be a mix of therapy, counseling, could be some appropriate medication management. And the combination of those two things actually can help alleviate the symptoms, which then may put a person in a position to be able to engage and not experience the loneliness of isolation. So hopefully that helps just to set the stage, because I don't want anyone who's experiencing
Mhm.
depression that's listening to this podcast to kind of internalize and like, oh, what's wrong with me? Like, this is, kind of this internal shame, but to say, whoa, no, if this is a mental health concern, address the mental health concern so that you can be in a position to implement some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So hopefully that's helpful as a
Would
caveat.
you would you say that just for clarification that mental health can be a magnifier of these feelings, or it can be the cause, or are you saying both? And that you
Yeah.
got to kind of fill that out for yourself.
Yeah, it can be both. The reason I want to bring it up because it can be the cause.
Okay.
And if we don't acknowledge it as a potential cause, then some inappropriate shame can be experienced by the individual that's experiencing an actual illness, a real illness, just as real as any other physical illness, and that they might have an internal dialogue that's really negative to say, whoa, hold on. If you're experiencing the depression, treat the depression. And again, there's resources available, and then oftentimes the loneliness will subside because the depression is being
Mhm.
treated correctly. Does that
Yeah,
help clarify?
no, I think that's super helpful because like somebody out there that maybe doesn't know that they're struggling with their mental health is just like,
That's
man,
it.
I am just in such a tough spot right now, and it's
That's
maybe
right.
feeling like, why can't I just figure this out? And you're like, no, 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 no. Like you might have stuff going on that's making this really hard on yourself. So it almost opens up more grace for yourself to be like, oh,
That's
okay,
it.
like maybe I'm not, maybe I'm not insane. Maybe I'm just struggling with a side of my mental health.
Yeah, yeah, you got it. No, that's really good. And then to be able to kind of go along with this narrative is we have to be careful of, from a cognitive perspective, what we call self-fulfilling prophecies or jumping to conclusions or mind reading. So our mindset might be, um, if I am not going to get married, then I'm going to be lonely for the rest of my life. Or if I don't go on a date this week, then I'm never going to get married. Or that date went horrible today. All dates are horrible. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa,
Mhm.
time out, right? Because we can get caught in this overgeneralization, catastrophizing. These are all cognitive distortions. Those thoughts, 100% of the thoughts that we have are real, but 100% of the thoughts that we have are not true. But if we don't install a filter that distinguishes between real thoughts and true thoughts, then we can end up in a very bad place emotionally that's not necessarily warranted by the circumstances of the environment, but because of our filter, our perception of the environment and circumstances. So again, I would just invite our listeners to be really careful of that self-talk or that narrative. I'll put in a quick plug for a book if that's okay.
Hmm.
There's a book called Soundtracks by John Acuff. And what it does is it invites us to be able to hone in to our self-talk. What's the narrative around our life generally, but you can see the applicability within relationships really, really strongly. So we're going to be talking about that, I think, continuing through the episode, but let's make sure that we're acknowledging what is our internal dialogue. Am I aware of it? And if there's distorted thought patterns, am I doing the things I need to be able to challenge those thought patterns?
And
So,
maybe
yeah,
we just
any
start
other
there.
thoughts on
And
it?
I was
Yeah.
just gonna say, like, kind of maybe what's a good test of, like, okay, if I'm really, feeling lonely, or I'm feeling kind of really down about myself in these moments of being isolated, or even in group setting, what's kind of a good filter to start to add? Like, if you're somebody that
Hmm.
maybe hasn't had professional therapy, or you anyways, just somebody that's maybe kind
Sure.
of new to this, what might be a good start with that?
Yeah. I love that question, Carter. That's so good. We have to, first of all, acknowledge and be aware of the distorted thought patterns. So there's this phrase that we use in therapy, which is simple. It goes like this: awareness precedes change. I can't change anything that I'm not aware of. So I think I start there, right? The awareness precedes change. And when I say awareness, I'm thinking of, are you aware of scripts or narratives that sound like always, never, these superlative words that are overgeneralized. And so I would invite our listeners to be able to think of their own self-talk and to be able to catch themselves in that sort of dialogue, and then we're going to replace it. So I'm going to give you a little skill from John Acuff from his Soundtracks book. He says, once we become aware of the narrative, we need to ask ourselves three questions about the narrative. We need to ask ourselves, is it true? And if it's untrue, we need to work to be able to change the dialogue. But he also says, is it useful? Some dialogues are true, but they're not useful. They're not helpful to us. And then the third question he asks us to consider is it kind? We need to be kind in our self-talk. In fact, what I've noticed is that we tend, on average, to be much more kind in our conversations with other people and give other people the benefit of the doubt, but we can be our own worst critics. We can be very hard on ourselves. And so sometimes what I'll do as an intervention is I'll invite the person to consider that we're going to clone the set of challenges or problems that they're experiencing into their very best friend, right?
Mm.
So here comes their best friend, and they're saying, Carter, man, can I talk to you? I've really been struggling with X, Y, and Z. And then I would just invite you to consider, Carter, what advice or counsel would you give that best friend who came to you? And on average, of course, I know you, but on average, people would say, "Oh, you got this, no problem. Like you're amazing. You have so many strengths." Like you, right? They're encouraging, they're understanding. But if it's me, then it's like, you're so stupid. Like, why did you say that on that date? You're such an idiot. No one's going to ever want to marry you, right? Like, we can get down on ourselves really hard, really fast. But those words, on average, would never come out of our mouth if our best friend came to us and just told us about a horrible date. Does that make sense?
Why is that? Like, we did the same thing last semester with our mental health life lesson, where we had them run through like four scenarios. It's like, what would you say to yourself? What would you say to your friend? And what would Jesus say to you? And the ones that
Yeah.
they said to their friends, and what would Jesus say, were beautiful. I was like, you guys should all be therapists. And then you look at the ones they say to themselves, it's just like, you're dumb, you're ugly, like you don't need to go to school today because you got a big zit on your face, like whatever, like just all these
Yeah.
really like hard things.
Yeah.
I'm like, why is that? And maybe it's just part of the human experience, but like, why are we so much harder on ourselves than what we would ever even verbally say to other people?
Yeah. It's a fair question. Again, not knowing for sure what the origin of it is, although there are a couple of indicators that I invite us to consider. And one is a sense of security or confidence in ourselves and where that comes from. So, one of the things that's challenging about our society, I don't know that this is unique to us, it's maybe just been exacerbated because of social media, is this idea of, am I good enough? And with a 24/7 opportunity to compare, then we will always find something that we are not as good at than somebody else, right?
Mhm.
And again, this can be a cognitive distortion as well because of the comparison piece. Then we tend to maximize our weaknesses and minimize our strengths. And so I think just acknowledging that, just saying that out loud can allow us to say, am I giving myself enough credit for the strengths that I have? And am I acknowledging that I do have weaknesses, but everyone else has weaknesses? And so I don't know that this necessarily comes automatically to us. I think I love sports, so I'll use a sports analogy. There are some people who are just more gifted athletically than others, right? But that doesn't mean the person who isn't gifted naturally athletically can't work to improve their athleticism. Does that make sense? So within a cognitive perspective, there may be some people who tend to be, on average, a little more kind, a little more realistic in their self-talk. But that doesn't mean the person who's pretty critical of themselves can't learn and improve in that area. So I think there's many factors there. I think there's the comparison piece that makes it hard. I think that just from a stages of development aspect, we have an identity versus role confusion, Erickson's stages of change. And if we don't have an appropriate identity that can happen in the context of relationships, relationships with God, relationships with community, relationships with family, then we can really struggle in terms of who am I? You know? And if I don't have a clarity in terms of that, then I can tend to be really, really critical of myself.
So if somebody is in this headspace of being really critical of themselves, again, I'm kind of hearing like what you're saying. All right, we can try and filter our thoughts through some of those kind of questions you said, but then also kind of going back to your identity, again, regardless of religious affiliation, if somebody comes into your therapist office, how do you
Yep.
start to rebuild kind of that view of yourself? Is there any kind of quick practice or, journal
Sure.
prompt or anything that you feel would be helpful in kind of resetting that even
Sure.
for lifelong members of the church? I'm sure there comes times where they kind of have to rebuild or rewrite that identity.
Yeah, that's a great question. Purpose, a purpose statement, life vision, again, which I think is regardless of religious affiliation, for those that are spiritual or have a strong connection to God, it may alter what they put for their purpose or their life vision. But if I have clarity in terms of where I want to be in the future, then I have to ask myself, what are the practices and behaviors and thought patterns that are going to lead to that outcome? And so if I have clarity in terms of my vision, clarity in terms of where I want to go, then I can work backwards. It's kind of a reverse engineering principle, right?
Mhm.
And so then I can say, is this thought pattern congruent with where I want to end up in life? And that's where I think that introspection can say, you know what? No, that does not, that thought pattern, that narrative, that script does not support that I want to be dot, 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 whatever the vision is. Or I can reverse it to be able to say, you know what? When I extended grace to myself and when I sought connection, it really did align with my vision and my life's purpose. And so I would say simply to have clarity in terms of what is my mission, what's my life vision, my
Mhm.
purpose. There's a lot of value there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess last question on kind of this point of application is I think one of the things that like get what I can't remember exactly the question how you phrased it to ask yourself, but like, is it helpful? Is it kind of that type
Yeah.
of
Is
thing.
it true? Yep. Yep.
Yeah. I think one thing that's hard, like you said, even if it is true, is it helpful? Like these thoughts of like, you're not attractive enough, or you don't make enough money, or you're not funny enough, or you're not tall enough, or you're not buff enough, like these type of things. How do you kind of push out or get out of the thought pattern of thinking that way, even if it might be true, even if you're not the most attractive person in the world or not the funniest person in the world, you're like, okay, those things, maybe those are true. Probably not for me. I'm probably the most attractive in the world, but for other people, like how do you kind of combat some of those thoughts that might be true but not super helpful? Because that's what I struggle with is like you're like, this feels really true. Like I'm not
Yeah.
very good on first dates. Statistics in my dating life have shown that. Like it's just not great. So it might be true, but is it helpful to constantly remind myself of it? No, absolutely not. What would be your advice on that front?
Yeah. Progress. look at progress. There's another great book called The Gap and the Gain. And I love the principle that they say progress is measured backwards. So instead of the question being, am I as attractive? Do I make as much money as anyone else, right? Or am I the world's worst first dater? Whatever you want to say. The question is, am I making improvement from where I was last year? And if people are honest, for the most part, in some areas of our life, we can look back and say, you know what? I'm not perfect at that, but I am getting better. And then we take our confidence from the progress that we've made instead of focusing on the gaps or the holes in what I don't have. And so, I mean, I would even say in that situation, I appreciate your vulnerability and kind of saying, you know what, hey, that didn't go very well. I need to improve on that. It's like, awesome. That's great that you acknowledge that. And have you made progress over the last several years? Like, are there things that you've learned? And I think if we can stay in that headspace, we're in a much better place to actually make future progress by looking at our past progress.
I'm just seeing the big problem with social media now because you can be in that headspace. Oh, well, like I am doing good. Like, I had a better date or whatever. And then you see, the happy couple that's been married for 5 years and you're like, man, well, now all my progress has got like you just see such a
Yeah.
problem with that. Or like, you're
Yeah.
like, I went to the gym today. I did really good. And then you hop on social media and you see this guy that's just shredded, but he's on like 25 steroids and peptides. And you're just like, what am I
Yeah,
doing? So I see a bit. I see a
that's right.
big opposition factor there.
I mean, let's stay on social media for a minute, if that's okay, because I think we have to acknowledge both the pros and the cons as it relates to social media, tying back to loneliness,
Hmm.
dating as well, but loneliness is for sure. And it's that on average, if social media is used as a passive experience, it has a negative relation or negative correlation with our mental health. We
Meaning you're
feel
just like scrolling for
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, doom scrolling, right? Yeah, it's just passive, right? I'm not contributing at all. And on average, individuals who spend this time on social media in a passive way, just scrolling, right? They experience higher levels of loneliness, higher levels of anxiety, more depression, as opposed to people who use social media actively, which means that I am producing content because there's actually a positive correlation between what we do, production, and how we feel about our self-confidence and reaching out to certain individuals within the social media as a means to be able to enhance connection. And what we learn actually is that individuals who use social media to produce content and to connect with other people do not have the same negative implications on their mental health. They actually can feel more connected as opposed to less connected when those two things happen. So I think that's important to be able to acknowledge for sure. And then to be able to take your point of comparison with social media, because this one is a tough one, to be able to say, I'm actually only seeing what they want me to see.
Mhm.
So I might say a picture and be like, oh, there's that couple, they're celebrating their 5 year anniversary. They're the happiest couple in the world. Maybe, maybe, but probably what they're not posting is the fight that they had last week either.
Right.
Right. But that's just normal. There's ups and downs in relationships. But I guess the false dichotomy is that marriage equals connection. And unfortunately, in a professional setting, I've worked with many, many married couples who are incredibly lonely. And so, really, the idea is, should we focus on marriage? Although, again, I'm an advocate for marriage, huge advocate for marriage. But if this episode is about overcoming loneliness, let's talk about tools and skills and strategies to be able to overcome loneliness, regardless of marital status. So, an individual who is feeling lonely, who's experiencing loneliness, can go one of two ways. They can experience some maladaptive coping strategies that might, for a time, overcome the feelings of loneliness, or they can learn some tools and skills that will help them feel connected to overcome those feelings of loneliness. So, here's just one example, if it's okay. In my work with some individuals who are struggling with pornography, we talk about making sure that they understand the emotional triggers that might precede them seeking out pornography.
Mhm.
Okay. And the acronym we use is BLAST, BLAST, right? And each of these five letters stand for an emotional state that increases the likelihood that an individual would turn to pornography as a coping mechanism. So bored, lonely, angry, stressed, and tired. We could go through all five of them, but our
Just every
purpose today is talk
single
about loneliness.
YSA's mindset.
Well, yeah,
All
so
five of those.
so you can see why the vulnerability and susceptibility to this practice. So if an individual is experiencing loneliness and what they actually want is connection and love and belonging, you can see that the lie that pornography sells is that it's available through porn. And what we actually know is that individuals who turn to pornography as a means to overcome loneliness actually experience more loneliness. That's part of the cycle that you're talking about. And so, from a clinical setting, what we'll do is we'll sit with our clients and say, hey, you have to have some sort of emotional intelligence. You have to know when you're feeling bored, lonely, angry, stressed, or tired. Because if you don't, you're not going to be in a position to be able to implement the strategy or strategies. So the question is, when I'm experiencing loneliness, what are healthy coping mechanisms that I can do to be able to feel a sense of belonging and connection? Right? Porn would say, oh, just turn to pornography. That'll solve it. And it doesn't. And so we'd say, okay, well, what helps you feel connected? And usually we go back to a couple of different kind of go-to strategies. And the key two words here are reach out. It's our responsibility when we're experiencing loneliness to reach out to these different groups of people that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. And the reason why I think that's so important is because it's the only thing we can control. You kind of referenced that earlier, right? There are things that are in our control and things that are out of our control. I cannot control whether someone reaches out to me. I can control whether I reach out to somebody else. So in those moments of loneliness, my go-to mantra is reach out. Who am I going to reach out to? Family, sibling relationship, parental relationships, cousin relationships. I've worked with many a young adult who's found great joy, satisfaction, belonging through deepening their familial relationships. I think that's a great place to start in terms of family relationships. But I'd also say that you have a church community that you can reach out to. And in developing friendships and connections within your church community, there's a great sense of purpose and belonging that happens. That again, we're not talking about romantic necessarily. We're just talking about we're wired to connect as human beings.
Mhm.
And within church communities, there is an inherent organization designed to be able to help us connect with others. The other one that I'd invite us to be able to consider is those with shared interests. So if you're into music, whether you're into sports, whether you're into art, there is more than likely some community that exists within wherever you live that are listening to this that you can actually develop connections with or friendships with. But again, the idea is that I have to be able to reach out. I'm not going to wait till other people reach out to me because I don't have control over that. So then it begs the question, why don't we reach out more? Like, if we know that that's the answer, why don't we do it? And here's what I've come to learn. We know that vulnerability is the pathway to connection, but it also opens up the window to rejection.
Right.
And so the reason why most of us don't reach out, or the reason why most of us are not vulnerable, is because we fear rejection. And so then we have this really interesting decision that we have to make to be able to say, ooh, okay, I want connection, I want love, and I want belonging. I know it goes through the pathway of vulnerability, but I don't want to be vulnerable because I don't want to be rejected. And then you have to make a decision in terms of opportunity cost. Is it worth it to you to continue down the path of loneliness at the expense of love, connection, and belonging so that you don't have to be vulnerable? And I think most people at some point say, uh, worth the risk. I am going to open myself up, knowing that there's going to be rejection along the way, because it could lead to the path of connection and belonging to overcome this loneliness that I experience.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I have to be very self-aware of that because like there are times I honestly I couldn't handle another rejection right now. I probably could in reality actually handle it. I'm just saying I just don't want to deal with it right now. So I have to be
Yeah.
very aware of what my body, what my mind is telling myself. Like, can you handle it? And so I kind of have to take it in spurts, especially with like online dating. I feel like you got to be in a certain headspace to be able to deal with that type of constant rejection. Also, there is the validation on the other side of that, but I think trying to listen to yourself, like, what is my body telling me? Do I need to reach out right now? Do I need
Yeah.
to, whatever, or do I need to maybe kind of focus more on, getting to a better space before that? But like you said, reaching out, I think there's different levels of safety of reaching out, like reaching
Sure.
out to a bishop or a parent or an institute teacher, probably
Yep.
not going to get rejected. I can't say that
Yep.
for certain, but
Right.
trying to go on first dates from an app, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I think that there is something to be said about appropriate self-care practices to make sure that we're in a good place in our mind, in our body, in our spirit. Not perfect, right? Don't wait for perfection, just that we're progressing, because I think that does help facilitate us to be at a we're more likely to be vulnerable. Some of that comes out of the research from Brene Brown about the power of vulnerability. And that also means on the receiving end when someone's vulnerable to us to open up, that we receive them. We don't have to have the perfect answer, but we can
Mhm.
just acknowledge them and commend them for reaching out to us, whatever the issue might be. And I also think it's important to be able to acknowledge, you may have heard of this, but the longest longitudinal study on happiness comes out of Harvard University. And as they've tracked this group for now over 80 years, what they've found is the single strongest predictor of happiness is positive relationships. It's not money, it's not physical health, it's not your occupation. It actually is positive relationships. And again, many of these individuals who are in this study do happen to be married, but it wasn't marriage, it was positive relationships. And so the idea is what can emerging adults do in let's call it a single state to still enhance positive relationships. And then we get into this idea of, well, what are the skills necessary to be able to do that?
Mhm.
Vulnerability, of course, is one of them, right? But I think this idea of confidence, of gratitude, of I would say there's a big piece that's complimenting, like to recognize what people do well and to be able to acknowledge that and to be able to give compliments. I actually think that's a huge part of positive relationships as well. So I think those are just factors to be able to consider in our conversation.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to the next question I had of like, because for me, like I don't think it would be genuine to myself or people in this singlehood phase to say oh, I'm not feeling lonely anymore. I can go out and do it. I think that it's just kind of comes with the territory that there are going to be moments of loneliness. But the issue I see with that is that a lot of the times, like you're saying, I'm just done. I'm just closing
Yeah,
myself
yeah,
off.
yeah,
No
yeah,
more emotional intimacy. And I think that's number one. I think that's obviously a very dangerous place to be in, just to be like, I'm just done with this, whatever. What do
yeah,
you think you can do to remain open to emotional intimacy, whether that's friends, whether that's romantic, whether, again, maintaining that ability to reach out, maintaining that ability to be open. Like if somebody's trying to help you or trying to be friends with you, like, and again, I see it in myself. Like I'm just shut people out. Like I don't want to deal with the disappointment, so I'm just gonna, I'm done.
yeah.
How do you remain open to that, or like kind of say, okay, I'm feeling this way, but I'm still gonna try and push forward in a healthy way? What would be your advice or perspective on that?
Yeah, great question. I think it's wise to acknowledge that loneliness is part of the normal human experience,
Mm,
that it would be abnormal for an individual not to experience some degree of loneliness as they go throughout their life. Now we're talking about prolonged loneliness as problematic, right? And we go back to that Surgeon General that he's talking about prolonged
mm,
loneliness. I think that's an important caveat to be able to say because in a moment of an evening of loneliness or even a week of loneliness, for a person to say, "Oh, something's wrong with me," or "I'm never going to be able to have connection because I feel lonely," it's like, no, that's normal. It's okay to be lonely. So I love the normalization that you did there. I think that's really, really powerful. Um, and then to be able to say, okay, but what about those moments when I do feel lonely, but I am not motivated to be able to reach out, even though I know that it's the
mm,
answer. I think that there's two responses, and one is spiritual in nature, and the other one's more social in nature. The spiritual one is to acknowledge the reality of the grace of Jesus Christ and to be able to call upon his power to be able to enable us to do things that we normally could not do on our own, right? The enabling power of Jesus Christ. And I think most believers have experienced that to some degree, to be able to say, I shouldn't have been able to do that, but with the help of Jesus Christ, I was able to. And so I think that there is a perfectly appropriate place to enlist the help of Jesus Christ in our loneliness, even when we feel discouraged. So that's the first answer that I would say. I think that the second answer that I would say is to be able to have clarity of where I want to end up. If I have clarity in terms of, I guess, what Stephen Covey talks about, one of his seven habits, begin with the end in mind. If the end is connection, not necessarily marriage, but connection, valuable relationships, healthy relationships, then if I have clarity in terms of the end, then it can say, I know that I don't feel like reaching out. I know that I don't feel like being vulnerable, but because this is where I want to end up, I'm willing to be able to experience the discomfort that is required for me to be able to get to that end. And so I think just remembering that of having the end in mind can be really helpful and really motivating.
Yeah, I again, I mean, that's a theme you've brought up a couple times, just having that deeper rooted purpose of, like, all right, where do I want to be? What type of person, what type of life do I want to be living? That can be really powerful. I would just kind of not push back, but just ask one clarifying question. How do you stay rooted in that with rejection? Because to me, like I have a very deep purpose. Like on my
Yeah.
vision board, whatever it says, what would your wife and kids want you doing right now? To me, that is super motivating. But
Hmm.
there's this like, man, time after time of rejection. It's like, oh man, I think they are going to be okay with me taking a nap today, or what? Again, I'm not saying you got to be. That's a bad example, but like, how do you healthily kind of push through some of the rejection that does come specifically with dating? Because to me, that's what I think is hard about this question is like, okay, it's easy a couple times, but then like, okay, year one, year two, year three of being single, that kind of wears away at that motivation to find that purpose. So any thoughts on that of pushing through to kind of stay in that moment of connection to that higher vision, even when, rejection is coming?
Hmm. Normalize it. If we have an expectation that part of the experience to be able to get to our end goal is going to be rejection after rejection after rejection, I think it helps us emotionally to take rejection as part of the process. And again, I'm going to use another sports analogy because I love the lessons that sports teach us, and I love failure. And I know that's hard for many of us to be able to even get out of our mouth, right? But to be able to say failure is the means of learning and a progression. And so if I can reframe rejection as opportunities to be able to learn, it helps to be able to normalize the experience. And then again, I go back in that same question to be able to say, what can I control? Am I making progress? Am I going in the right direction? And then that can be enough. That has to be enough. But that's such a powerful question, and I think it's so real and it's so raw. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Those are some of the practical, just narratives or stories that I would make sure that I'm entertaining in my mind.
One other therapist I had on my podcast, he says if you're being like rejected, like things aren't working out, he's like, people say dating isn't working. He's like, it actually is. He's like, that's the point of dating is whether you find somebody or you don't.
Yeah.
And I think we're just so focused on dating equals I find my person and get married. It's like, well, dating also means finding people that like you aren't compatible with. And that was helpful for me to be like, oh, okay, like if again, like I think the common phrase is dating in today's society sucks. It's like, well, maybe we're just framing it as dating equals finding your person. Finding your person, maybe that's really difficult right now, but maybe dating as a whole, it is working if you are, being rejected because you're finding people that you aren't compatible with. And that was
Yeah.
helpful for me.
It's a great reframe. I know this isn't the most romantic way of viewing dating, but in a way, dating is data collection, and really you're looking at compatibility. You're looking at your connection in that way. You're looking at attributes that you want in a future spouse, both through a mirror, right, in myself
Mhm.
and in others. But if I just reframe the purpose of dating as again, data collection is kind of interesting, but just getting to know an individual. In fact, this is maybe a good time. I'll just back up real quick to be able to say, in all of the marriage research, um, it's called common factors. It's across all relationships. What are the things that predict happy and successful marriages? And the number one predictor of successful and happy marriages is friendship. And there's a lot of other factors, but that is the number one. And so that for me takes a little bit of the pressure off in terms of dating to be able to say, okay, I got to date to be able to make sure I'm going to marry this person. Like, no, like, can you date to be able to deepen a friendship? And you'll find some people that you're more compatible with than others in that realm. But it helps me take a little deep breath. And ironically, the people that we end up marrying are the people that we end up connecting with just on a friendship level. But again, the goal, if the goal of dating was just friendship, I think that takes some of the pressure off. And I think it's a reasonable goal. I think it's a realistic goal.
You're like going on a date. You're like, hey, we're just friends. We're trying to work on our friendship right now, and friend zone
That's
them
it.
right from the beginning. Say this is going to lead us to a better marriage, so we got to be friends first.
I'm telling you, and I think as well, kind of going back to this idea of are we actually dating in a way that's going to help us to get to know each other in productive, healthy ways regarding friendship, and then otherwise, you may have talked about this on this podcast, but Elder Oaks, when he talked about dating, he said that we might use the three P's of dating. Is the date planned? Is it paired off? And is it paid for? And then it makes me think how many of our young adults are dating according to those three P's, which on average are going to increase the likelihood that we have connection. Again, not necessarily marriage all the time, but that we felt a connection with another person. I think that's a big deal.
Would you mind just giving an example of a date that you would be like that fits that criteria? Because like
Yeah.
you said planned,
Hmm.
paired off,
And
and
paid for.
paid for.
Paid for. Yeah,
There you
yeah. I'll
go.
give you an
Good
example.
Elder or
And
President Oak's example of a date.
yeah, for sure. In fact, maybe this is kind of humorous, I guess, but we have a little challenge for each of our children to help them progress during their adolescence. And so one of my boys, he's 16 right now, he's going into his junior year. His challenge is to take 50 different girls on dates before his mission.
Whew.
And so, yeah, he's rocking it. He's at 12. Let's go, baby.
Already?
Yeah, yeah.
Dang,
So
good
he's
for him.
getting there. So we've had lots of conversations about this, but the idea is that they don't have to be elaborate. I think that's sometimes what becomes intimidating is, especially in high school, depending on the high school, but a lot of the culture is like big fancy way to ask, day
Right.
date, breakfast. It's like night after. I'm like, what in the world are we doing here, right? And so then it's like, no, I'm out. So to be able to say, what's a simple date? One is to be able to the paired off part is I think is huge. That I'm reaching out to one individual to be able to say, hey, are you available on Friday night? Hey, are you around on Saturday night? Right? To make it clear that I am asking you to pair with me, not for eternity, for a 2 to 3 hour block,
Yeah.
right? Just a couple hours. That's the invitation for paired. And then to be able to say that there's a plan. Once they've said, yeah, I'm available to be able to say, hey, we're thinking about going laser tagging and grabbing some ice cream, right? That there's a specific plan in place, that it's not just, Elder Oak says, hanging out,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And that can be the default position. But nope, I'm paired up with someone and then I've got a specific plan in place. Doesn't have to be elaborate, it can be real simple. But then the paid for piece I think is important too, to be able to say, this isn't everyone kind of paying for their own, but the person who asked is going to pay for the date. You know, so I think that there's again, our listeners are going to be all over the place, but in Southern Utah, there are so many simple, inexpensive, fun dates that can be done all year long, but it takes some initiative to pair off. and plan. And then, again, the other P is paid for. So I don't know. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah,
My
no,
my
that
boy, my
is
boy that's
that
going to
is
high school,
helpful.
he
To
has
me,
the
it just kind of
starving student
means
card.
it to me it just kind of means be more intentional about
Yeah.
it. Like, again, I think a big problem in, and we'll get to this question here in just a second, but a big problem in today's dating world is, do you want to just hang out? And I'm
Yes.
just like, I just don't think that just starts off with problems from the bat in my eyes of like, we don't know what's going on, we don't know who's pursuing, and it creates a lot of kind of missed expectations. But so I like that idea of just giving general guidelines to help people be more intentional about the dates they're going on. Kind of wrapping up, I asked one of my professors this question. It just came into my mind off the cusp, and I really liked his answer, and so I'm trying it again. But if you were the president of the dating world, I know you have a lot of leadership opportunities, so you probably have some interesting perspectives on this. But like, what would you do to man, we got to stop doing this. It's really,
Mm.
causing loneliness to increase. Or man, when I see kids do this, it just helps them so much in finding connection, finding community, finding dating opportunities. What would you're implementing rules, or you're taking things away? What would you do if you were President Olson of the dating world?
That sounds like a fun position.
Yeah,
I like it. I like
I'm gonna
it.
start campaigning for it soon.
I love it. I'd vote for you, man. Um, that's an awesome question. I don't know that I'm going to say anything earth-shattering or new here because I don't want to overcomplicate it. I think that one of the rules that I would implement is to require vulnerability. Like you cannot have this conversation without saying you have to be vulnerable. That there's no other way around it other than vulnerability. But the other piece, honestly, that I would say is comparison. I really do think that comparison leads to, we say comparison is the thief of joy. That's true. And if we're saying what's the relationship between loneliness and joy, they're not by each other in the emotional spectrum, right? And so I think that we have to be really careful about comparing and to say it doesn't matter what date or not a date that your friend or roommate went on or didn't go on. Like this is not about their journey. It's not about you care for, you love other people, right? But you're just saying, I'm going to control what I can control, and I'm going to use my agency to be able to act. And so the rule of dating would be to act and not be acted upon, and in that acting to be able to choose to be vulnerable because it is the pathway to connection.
Well, I feel like vulnerability almost leads to that. If you're finding ways to be vulnerable, like it kind of just breaks down any superficial walls. Like that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast. Because, like you were saying, there's married couples that are feeling this way, but we just
True.
don't hear about it because nobody's going to get up in a testimony meeting and be like, "Hey, me and my husband are married and I feel super lonely." Like that people would
Yeah.
never do that. That happens in YSA all the time. And so I'm like, I want to create a more vulnerable society, because if we are, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, like I can just break down these superficial walls and I can just show up as I am. But we don't do that because we're scared or afraid of that. So I love that key of saying looking for ways to be more vulnerable.
Yeah, and lead out in changing the culture, right? This is one of the reasons that I asked my boy to do this for his challenge, is because as he does it, his friends do it. And as their friends do it, their friends do it, right? And it has this ripple effect. And so I love that you're saying, hey, I'm going to take the initiative to be able to bring these out into the open and to act on them. I love what you're doing. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
So the millions of fans will just change the world. So right now it's just my mom and dad, but hopefully pretty soon it will be everybody. But if somebody's listening to this and they're really struggling, or they're like, man, I want to reach out, do you have like a therapist email, or a professional work email, or anything, or something that somebody could reach out to you on to connect with?
Yeah, for sure. So our therapy practice is Ascend Counseling and Wellness. AscendCW.com is our website, and our headquarters are down here in St. George. So the number there is 435-688-1111. And again, for those that are experiencing emotional or mental challenges, relationship challenges, and need a little help, there's some great resources that are available for you.
There you go. You probably have millions of applicants tomorrow morning. You'll just or whenever this comes out, you just be like, wow, we have so much business. We have to hire a new therapist. So, anyways,
We're happy to help.
there you go. Well, thank you again for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. Again, like, I tell most of my guests this, like again, I'm doing this to hopefully help other people, but this world of dating has been very difficult for me, and I've found a lot of value in having conversations like this. So again, at the very least, thank you for helping me, and hopefully there's lots of other people out there that you help. But thank you again for coming on today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Carter.
All
Appreciate it,
right.
man.
This has been episode 14 of the Relationship Comeback. We'll see y'all next time where we're learning to become the one so we can attract the one. We'll see you later.